Welcome to Season 6 of the Let's Talk Data podcast series presented by SAP, where we explore game-changing technologies with leading experts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of our Let's Talk Data podcast series, the podcast series where we talk about all things data related within SAP. Whatever platform you're listening on, I hope that you will subscribe to our platform so you can be notified of all of the new episodes that we get. So today we're pretty lucky. Our topic today is best ways to leverage data management services across the SAP Business Technology Platform. You know, we all know that the SAP Business Technology Platform is SAP's platform for all the technology services that we offer. Here we're going to focus on data management services. So to do that, I really had to bring in the big guns today to be on the podcast. So I know you've heard Silvio before, Silvio Arcangeli. Did I say your last name right, Silvio?
You did, yeah. Thanks, Ginger. Thanks for having me.
I learned that from a video you did with Timo where you were talking about our data management solutions. Yeah. And Silvio's been around SAP a long time. You've probably heard him on the podcast. There's another really good podcast as he's done, episode 38, Hybrid Data Management, Are You Ready? So Silvio is a guru on all of our data management topics from go-to-market and product strategy. So Silvio, thank you for joining us today. We're glad that you're here.
Always my pleasure.
And we have another person on our podcast that you may not have heard before. Axel is like the silent guru. So you may not have heard him before on our podcast. He hasn't been here before. He's been very involved in things like our data intelligence content sprint, working closely with partners. He's very product knowledgeable. So we're really lucky we have him today. Axel Schuller. Now, Axel, I've never said your last name before. Did I say that name correctly, Axel?
That's very good. Thanks.
Oh, thank All right. So Axel is also in our data management area, in our solution management area, helping us figure out the best way to make sure the products meet the needs of our customers. So I want to thank you both very much for being here today. So we want to talk about our data management services across the SAP Business Technology Platform. So I want to kind of take a step back and start by defining the SAP Business Technology Platform. So you guys, what I did is before the podcast started, I went to our sap.com site to bring in the official definition, and then we're going to have Silvio and Axel expand on this a little bit. So SAP's official definition is SAP Business Technology Platform, or SAP BTP, which we'll normally refer to it as, brings together data management, analytics, artificial intelligence, application development, automation, and integration in one unified environment. So that's our official definition that you get from sap.com. So Silvio, why don't you explain that to me like I'm 5? Help me really understand what that means, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so no, thanks, Ginger. So really, to keep it simple, it means that when enterprises want to leverage IT to implement business processes, to implement the way they operate, and possibly to improve the way they operate, normally there's always also some degree of customization, some degree of integration, some degree of extension that they need to implement around the applications involved. And of course, there's always also some degree of analytics, right, that you need on top of those applications in order to steer the decisions in the best possible way. So all of these concerns, so extension, integration, analytics, involve some technology to be able to properly operationalize all of those IT systems in order to support the business scenario that you want to achieve, right? So there are two possible ways of doing it. So, right, one is the pure technology way, which is what most hyperscalers are proposing these days. So their approach is really give you a bunch of tools and that excellent tools, and then you find out your way of how to make something with them that can be relevant to your business processes. Whereas SAP, of course, we have a different DNA and we went for a different way. So we started with the business scenario in mind. So we start with a very deep landscape of business applications, and we conceived a set of technology tools that are really thought for streamlining and operationalizing those business applications in order to achieve the results that enterprises need, right? So the idea is we don't build technologies just for the sake of technology because it's beautiful. We build a set of coherent and integrated technology tools which are meant to help exactly supporting those business applications use cases that I mentioned earlier. So solve all of the concerns around how to extend your applications, how to integrate them, and how to deliver analytics across your application. So the set of services is quite wide. So and there's a lot of technologies involved, but the key concept is pretty simple.
I really love that, how we don't develop technology just for technology's sake. We develop technology to push the business forward. I remember a long time ago, I've been with SAP a really long time. I was in a big town hall, and somebody was asking me, why aren't we investing in something? It was some little niche technology that was, this was 10 years ago. I don't even remember what it was. And the speaker, he was so good. He's like, we have to build technology that's going to scale across all countries, across all business processes across the world. I mean, we have customers that make bombs. We have customers that process financial transactions, right? We have customers that build, children's toys. We have customers that process oil. I mean, we have customers that do everything. Our customers do things that really make the world run. So we have to make sure the technology we develop serves the end of the business, right? We can't do it just because it's the coolest thing on the market. Yeah, if that coolness can scale globally, if that coolness can manage complex transactions, great. But I love that, Silvio. That's good. Axel, what do you have to add to that? I know you were talking about some other things earlier before we started recording. What do you have to add to Silvio's?
Yeah, it was a really excellent overview over the business aspects of the platform, but it also has technology in the name for a reason. So it actually means we can also integrate, or if you look at it from a technical perspective, right? So you can integrate on a data level, connect to various databases or data lakes and things like that. You can connect on an application layer. It also allows you to extend the application if you find that it doesn't offer the specific functionality that you need, and you can build on what we have already. You may know this concept a little bit from the ABAP side, where we have these classical ABAP extensions. Now in the Business Technology Platform, we have something similar, only with more capabilities that allows you to extend these applications outside of the application as well.
Yeah. Because while we'd love for everybody to have only SAP, that's not the case, right? So Axel, I love the point that you're making, that SAP Plus, right? The business technology helps you bring in that plus, helps you integrate to that plus, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think y'all have done a great job of kind of discussing that. So we said it brings together the official data management, analytics, AI, application development, automation, extension, all that stuff. So today we want to narrow our discussion to really focus on these data management services that really are focused around data cataloging. That's what we want to talk about today. Data integration, that's another one we want to talk about, and data processing. So in this podcast, we really want to focus on what these three services are, kind of how they work, and then later we'll get into use cases of how they're used across the BTP. So data cataloging, data integration, and data processing. So Silvio, let's start with you. What do we offer with SAP BTP for data cataloging? What are we doing in that area?
Yeah, so first of all, why do we offer it
well,
also?
That's true.
So,
yeah, that's more important. Thank you. That should have been the question I asked.
Because I mean, data cataloging is in my opinion is probably one of the most underestimated needs in terms of delivering proper intelligence and analytics across business applications and business landscapes. Because the first requirement really that you need to fulfill if you want to make some sense of your data in order to better steer your business is that you need to know what data you have available, and you need to know its meaning, and you need to understand whether or not it's reliable. And And even if not all of the organizations realize that, the reality is that in current landscapes, there's nobody in any large enterprise, but even in small enterprise sometimes, there's nobody who can be knowledgeable about all of the data that is available, because there's just too much of it, right? So that's the problem. And knowing all of the data models was something that probably was still viable like 15 years ago, when landscapes were much smaller and more controlled. There were typically a few people in the organization that were the data gurus. But nowadays, that approach based on having a few data gurus that are able to translate a business KPI to a bunch of tables, it doesn't scale anymore. So you cannot rely on people to be knowledgeable about each and every data model and each and every data asset. So that is why, if you want to enable getting some more value out of the data, the very first requirement is that, first of all, you need to understand what data can I use, right, in my context, in my landscape. And then once you understood that, you need to understand, is that data reliable enough? So what's the quality of that data? How much inconsistencies do I have? How much dubious data do I have within that data asset? So that is why the concept of discovering the data and democratizing access to knowing what data I have available is really a key enabler to start approaching data-driven projects and extracting more value out of the data. So data catalog is and should be a starting point of every business improvement project in these days. Going back to your question, of course, so this is I hope a fair explanation of why we need to care about a data catalog. In SAP, we have built a data catalog within our cloud platform in a service that is called SAP Data Intelligence Cloud. So that service includes also a full-blown data cataloging capability that is able of discovering the data, of profiling it, of classifying it, and enforcing data quality rules and monitoring the data quality overall. So which are all of the major concerns that you should solve before starting to do something with that data in terms of extracting analytics and extracting intelligence.
We have a study that's going to be released that we did with a research firm, and I can't really discuss it yet because it's not out. But one of the things you said, Silvio, made me think of it. When they were talking to companies and figuring out what some of their top issues were, related to data. It was all around quality, visibility, and accessibility, which data catalog can definitely address. Just knowing what my data is, where it is, and putting some type of quality around it. It's amazing, quality is still a number one issue, right? When it comes to knowing that you can trust the data when you're looking at that analytic report, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I guess when we talk about data cataloging, we're bringing together data cataloging, metadata management, data discovery, bringing in some data quality, all within that. Is that right? Would you say that's true or not?
It is. So the idea is really to, as I said, to democratize access to those aspects, because those more technical data architects that perhaps can go straight at the database and to have an understanding at least of some of the data models involved, maybe they have ways of checking, right? So the quality of the data by some custom queries or things like that. But reality is that if you want to enable, for example, a data engineer or a data scientist or even just a citizen user that wants to just do some analytics, if you want to enable these people to be effective on top of the data, you need to allow them to understand the data in a way that has to be agnostic from the underlying source. So that you can allow a wider audience, right, of people with different levels of skills also to access all the data they need and to start deriving insights from that data. That's really the key meaning of a catalog. So making access to the data as democratic as possible and as easy as possible to different stakeholders with different backgrounds and different skills and different knowledge of various technology tools.
Okay, good. So Axel, once we have our data catalog, and we have our data discovery, and we have quality on it, then of course we have to. Data integration is another big service we have. So tell us what do we mean by our data integration services across the BTP? Why do we have them, and kind of what can they do?
Yeah, there are different aspects to it. So one is really you need to be able to access the data first, right? So Silvio talked about already the higher level services, cataloging, metadata management, data discovery, but in order to be able to use these features, you need first to be able to access the data. We also have data lineage, so you can see where's the data coming from and where it is going, which is very important if you want to have an overview of what's going on in your application. Now, if you're talking about the actual data integration, first we have data access. So we can connect to various data sources. I mean, these are the classical databases like SQL Server or DB2 or HANA. We can access various data lakes, all the big ones, of course, Azure Data Lake, Google Cloud Storage, S3. So we have a lot of them, so I don't want to mention all of them. What's interesting is we can also access data or manage data on a higher level by using existing toolings that we have, like data services. So you can connect to data services and use a predefined job that's running there. So you can use them in the context of data intelligence as well. And you can also connect to smart data integration and do the very same thing. Excuse me?
I was going to ask you, our data integration capabilities, does it span, what kinds of data does it span? It's more than just structured data, right? So we can have data integration with streaming data, or
it's good that you mentioned it. Yes, so we can access structured and unstructured data. Structured data with all these classical databases, or we also have access to, let's say, to Kafka, where you can have data streaming. We can also connect to another classical SAP tool, the System Landscape Transformation, SLT, and use it to bring data in or to send data out. It would be also real-time streaming capable. Now, once you have access to all these data sources, you can also do something with it. So you have a so-called modeler in data intelligence. Once you connect to the data sources, then you can use them in pipelines, so-called pipelines, where the data is read. Then you can add a so-called operator, where you can do something with the data. You can transform it or filter it or whatever you want to do with it. And let's say if you're not happy with what we have to offer to you or you don't find everything predefined, you can also create your own custom operators. It's a pretty open concept. What is a custom operator? It's essentially a representation of a Docker container. So you can imagine it can be pretty much anything in there. So it's a very flexible concept. You can pretty much get anything done if you really want to, and extend the pre-delivered functionality.
So from a data integration perspective, then I have these connections, whether it be to like databases, structured data,
Yes.
SAP things like HANA Cloud, data lakes, and then I have these Kafka connections to connect to streaming, and then I can build my own operators on top. So let's take this core of this with data integration. I can basically connect between the SAP apps and then, of course, the non-SAP apps where we talked about the BTP earlier, Axel, right? You can extend and go beyond, right? So then, Silvio, how do I take this data integration, connectivity, and plumbing ways that we can do stuff, and then do our data processing on top of that, right? So we're talking about data cataloging, data integration, and processing. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between data processing and data integration. And then let's
Yeah,
talk about what data processing enables us to do. So could you kind of build on what Axel gave a great thing of, like, these building blocks that we have, right? How do we
yeah,
kind of,
exactly. So
okay.
data processing is really the new building block, right? Because if you think of traditional analytics that were built on just an enterprise data warehouse where you were adding some BI visualization tool on top, there was not much processing that you were doing in the middle. But in these days, we know that there are more advanced ways of deriving insights out of data. So involving algorithms that can have very different degrees of complexity, right? So we go from relatively simple so-called shallow learning algorithms like, I don't know, clustering or predictive analytics, the kinds of examples like that, to full-blown machine learning where you do feature extraction and you do let's say more advanced approaches to deriving insights out of certain data assets. So in order to enable, let's say, all of these new approaches to deriving insights out of data, reality is that you need to also be able to juggle between several different technologies. So all of the data scientists that work in this space know how lively this whole space is in terms of ecosystem of different libraries, of different tools, of different engines. So there's a very wide variability also in terms of skills, right? Because depending on who is approaching a certain problem, he or she would probably like to reuse a library or a language or a tool just because it's something that it's part of the knowledge bag, right? So and the skill sets. So this is a new kind of requirement, as I said, because in order to foster this kind of analytics ecosystem within an enterprise in these days, we also need to think of how do we enable all of those stakeholders that are coming out of a university, that are coming from different experiences, to apply their knowledge and their toolkits and their libraries to our enterprise data, right? So we need to open up the data and open up the data to possibly orchestrating different processing engines, so different languages, different technologies, and so on. So that's why we established data processing as one of the pillars that, in our view, are significant, because once you discover the data, once you integrate the data to make it available for analytics, then the third step is how do you allow all of those new people jumping in the organization to apply their own knowledge and their own toolkits on that data, right? So and for this, you need to have a very open-minded and very open technology approach, allowing to possibly mix and match several different open source engines, reusing anything that we can possibly reuse, right? So because our overall objective is not to lock an SAP customer into using just our own proprietary tools. Our overall objective is always to enable our customers to make as much value and as much money as they possibly can using our data. That's the whole point. So
Yeah.
that's why processing is so important.
Yeah, so we can take the components that we have and enable people that, especially, graduates, people coming into the workforce, to bring in their knowledge and their tools to be able to use those with our data to make sure it's open. I really love that. Yeah, Axel,
Yeah,
were you going
exactly.
to?
So for example, mixing some use cases where you might want to reuse HANA PAL and APL, which are two examples of libraries that are proprietary to SAP and very optimized to run within HANA. But maybe in the very same use case, you also want to reuse some Python library taken from the open source stack because you have already developed that, and because it does things that are not even supported in the SAP engine, and it's a perfect complement, right? So and it's a very valid use case. So we want to streamline that kind of orchestration between SAP and non-SAP, reusing open source as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm glad you mentioned that use case, because I want us to pivot and take the last few minutes and really talk about. So you just mentioned a use case where we maybe want to combine HANA, or what's a predictive analytic library? What's it called? What's HANA PAL? What does PAL stand for?
Yeah,
Predictive
predictive analytics library,
library,
exactly.
maybe with some Python. Yeah, so that makes sense. And we have several other very practical use cases that we use with our data management services. And Axel, I know data migration is one that's close to your heart, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Would be a use case where you can use some of these data services?
Yes, so data migration, of course, very important because if you want to get started, you typically don't start from scratch, but you already have existing applications, existing data, and somehow you need to bring this to the BTP. Right. So here we have various options, but one important one that covers various use cases is SAP Advanced Data Migration, ADM by Synity, that allows you to migrate various products or the data from various products to the Business Technology Platform like S4. And it covers the whole aspect of data migration, right? So it's not just you move data from A to B, but once you do it, you probably want to also, or may want to consolidate. Right? Maybe you have several systems that you want to consolidate in one. That's what you can do then. And maybe you want to make sure that the data that you migrate is really high quality data. So while you migrate it, you can also take care of the data quality stuff. So since you anyway have to think about what you want to migrate and how you want to migrate it, then you anyway think about, more in detail about your data, and then you can also define steps to make sure that you have consistent data and that the quality of the data is right. So in the most simple case, you could simply say, okay, let's see for this purchase orders or so, do we have all the information in there that we expect to be there? Do we have the date? Do we have the name of the person or the company who made it, and so on? And if you find that a lot of this data, let's say the date is empty, then you can make sure that it is handled properly. So,
Yeah.
So you can do various steps at once, essentially.
Yeah. And what's nice about that is these BTP data services, they're not used just by us. They're used by our partners. For example, you mentioned Synity. And Synity is actually in another podcast. We have episode 39, Best Practices for Your Journey to the Intelligent Enterprise. And what's nice about that podcast, episode 39, we actually highlight 3 partners, Synity, Tricentis, and OpenText, that are all building additional solutions on top of the BTP. So let's just talk about a couple of more before we close it out today. Another data management use case, of course, would be like loading data. We talked about migration, but then, Silvio, talk for a minute a bit about how our data services would work with our cloud data warehouse, or data warehouse cloud. I want to give it the right name.
Yeah, exactly. SAP Data Warehouse Cloud.
Yeah.
So, no, that's a great point, Ginger, because in the past, if we look at how we were doing things on premise, we were often creating specialized tools for each single product. So, if you had to integrate data into HANA, you were using a certain tool. If you had to integrate data to another third-party tool, you were using a separate specialized tool. In the cloud, we decided to go for a different approach, and we wanted to unify as much as possible our platform and our solution. So the same set of services that you can use for integrating data towards any kind of cloud object store, hyperscaler storage, and so on, it's also the same services that we provide to our customers when they want to ingest data into SAP Data Warehouse Cloud. So that's why we talk about unification. So the data intelligence engine, in other words, is used in both cases. It's just that for the WC, we have also implemented a simplified UI that is embedded straight into Data Warehouse Cloud to make life easier, basically, to every Data Warehouse Cloud customer, and to allow, most of all, every Data Warehouse Cloud customer to be able to ingest data into their data warehouse without having to pay an additional service, right? So there's also a commercial kind of synergy in reusing our own tool. But in general, in terms of strategy and vision, you can expect that in the future, this kind of synergy and integration between our data management services and our data warehouse will improve even further. So, of course, whenever I say any roadmap statement, the usual roadmap disclaimer always applies, right? So things can change, but at the current stage, our view is that we want to further invest in integrating those tools together, and for example, by having a more pre-built integration on the catalog, and by having a better reuse of the integration features across both sides. So not just reusing the code in an embedded way as we've done so far. So stay tuned, because there will be more and more synergies that will come in the next quarters.
Yeah, and I think we have you down for another podcast in the future to really talk about our strategy and updates, and as we take these data management
we'll
services
dig more
and
into it.
combine
Yeah.
them, dig into it. Okay. And then just one other one here. Another way these data management services, of course, everybody wants to integrate with S4 and non-SAP Axel. I mean, non-SAP, comma, Axel. Would you talk a little bit about the integration with S4 and non-SAP, how these services can be used?
Sure. So I talked a bit about this before, where I mentioned that we are able to connect to these various data sources. And among them is, of course, also S4. So to connect to S4, we can do it in different ways. So we can access the tables, we can access static views, we can access CDS views. And based on that, we are able then to integrate with S4. Now, what's the interesting part is really if you look at the big picture, because usually you don't want to do this in a big bang, or often you don't do this in a big bang, but more in a step-by-step approach. So you may have an S4 system and you say, okay, I want to keep this running for the time being and already start to do integration with S4 in the cloud. And so you can connect to it and get some of the data over into the cloud and work with it, while you keep your system running as it is right now. And you can, by this, you can have a very nice hybrid scenario. So you can either move parts of the data, or you can virtualize it and see or use the data where it is without even moving it. And this can go then all the way up to the analytics layer. So you can have an end-to-end integration of your data from where it is on your on-premise location to your cloud, and then in the end to the analytics cloud layer, where you can have then an end-to-end view of the whole business without having to move it all at once. So this can stay like this for an extended period of time, or you say you have a clear path going to the cloud where over time you migrate the data over by using this kind of integration.
But the other thing we can do, Axel, with integration is we can have ongoing integrations with S4,
Absolutely.
like S4 to non-SAP. So if I have non-SAP systems I'm going to cover, and I'm live in S4, I'm going to have to continue to integrate these, right? And we can support all that through the BTP. Is that correct?
It can be very complex, right? So you can cover all sorts of scenarios. So you can keep your stuff as it is and integrate and have other products working based on your S4 backends, or you can have a hybrid scenario where you have several S4 systems working in parallel with sharing some of the data. In some cases, you may move or replicate the data. In others, you may prefer to have a virtualized data where you have a live view. Only in that case, you're limited to, let's say, a lower amount of data, because you don't always want to wait for hours until you have access to a large data set just because you don't want to replicate it. Right. So in this case, you have to think what makes sense. So if you're only talking about a smaller kind of data set, then you can leave it where it is. In other cases, you may want or have to replicate the data. Mm-hmm. But this can be a constant situation where you operate like this. The other option is what I talked before, is then to actually migrate the data. This would be more of a big bang transition. So you decide to make the big step and migrate all of the data, and then you proceed in the cloud.
Okay. And we just have a couple minutes left. So Silvio, I want you to talk just for a couple of minutes on hybrid landscape integration, right? Because we know that really, I don't know that we have hardly any customers that are 100% in the cloud, right? Everyone has something on premise and something in the cloud.
There's a great video that we recorded with Timo Elliott, by the way, on this topic, and I think it's a crucial topic in these days, because we know that each and every enterprise, each and every organization out there in the world is moving to the cloud at different paces, perhaps, or with different approaches, but the move is happening, and it's not reversible. So. And it's also allowing a big degree of flexibility in terms of the functional agility that you gain by moving to the cloud. But then what happens to your analytics stack once part of the data is in the cloud and part of the data is still very likely on-premise, right? So how can you ensure end-to-end analytics, and how can you make sure to move to the cloud, avoiding that kind of big bang approaches that also Axel was mentioning earlier? So I think that a key point is being able to reuse as much as possible what you have implemented on premise until at least those on premise. So for all the time where those on premise things are still relevant, right? So that's a key requirement. And at SAP, we have very solid on-premise tools that are still heavily used by thousands of customers worldwide. So we wanted to make sure that those customers can start implementing applications in the cloud and implementing end-to-end analytics across cloud and on-premise, while at the same time reusing all of the on-premise landscape for everything where it's still worth it, right? So that's the idea. Move to the cloud gradually at your own pace, without throwing away anything that you've done on premise, without throwing away the money you've spent on your premise tools, without throwing away the years of development you spent on the on-premise tools. So move to the cloud and innovate, but at your own pace, and do it gradually without any rip and replace. That's the idea, and we achieved it by having a seamless integration between our cloud data management services and our existing on-premise tools like SAP Data Services, SAP Information Steward, SAP BW, SAP HANA, SAP Landscape Transformation Replication Service, and all of those on-premise tools that are still heavily used by a lot of customers.
Yeah. You know, my dad always said, don't fix it if it's not broke. Right. So
exactly,
if you have on-premise things,
that's a very good philosophy.
Yeah, there's no value in moving them to the cloud. Leave them on-premise, and we'll integrate them to the cloud. Right. Don't fix it if it's not broke. You really have to start with where your business value is going to come from. Yeah. All right. Well, I think I think that's about a final wrap for us. Unless you guys have anything else you want to say, I'll give you a minute to think about that. Because if you want to learn more, you can go to sap.com/data management. You can go to community.sap.com, and we'll put the link to the video that Silvio mentioned in our show notes. Do y'all have anything else in final to say? I think we've made our major points. We wanted to talk about our data management services and BTP.
Yeah, I think a lot of the customers really agree with your dad.
Yeah, don't fix it if it's not broke. Yeah, exactly. Why move it to the cloud if it's not going to help my revenue at the end of the day? All right. Well, Silvio, Axel, thank you guys so much for joining. And please join us on our next episode of our Let's Talk Data podcast series. Go out and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thank you all so much. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ginger.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Use the links in the show notes to learn more. If this topic is of interest to you, then you might enjoy episode 38, Hybrid Data Management, Are You Ready? And episode 39, Best Practices for Your Journey to the Intelligent Enterprise. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Let's Talk Data podcast.